All right, the West is in the midst of a psyop, an attack on our culture and values, which, of course, made the West so great. We saw this attack on display with the Last Supper parody at the Paris Olympics. I've spoken about that ad nauseum. My next guest will discuss this and more. Dr. John Laughland is the director of Forum for Democracy International and a lecturer in political science and history at the Catholic Institute of the Vendée in Western France. He was director of the Eurosceptic think tank European Foundation until 2008 and director of studies at the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris until 2018. He worked at the European Parliament from 2018 to 2020. He joins us live from Paris. John Laughland, welcome to TNT.
Hello, Chris. Good morning or good evening.
Fantastic to have you with us. How outraged should Christians be over the Last Supper parody at the Olympics? And is it still reverberating in Europe?
Yes, it is. I've commented on it. You said you've talked about it ad nauseam. I've talked about it a lot. So friends of mine, people are still commenting on it. The point I made shortly after the ceremony, the day after, was that it wasn't just the parody of the Last Supper. That was, of course, the most extreme aspect, but there were many other sinister things in that whole ceremony. And when you looked at the ceremony as a whole, it had a very nasty coherence to it. What I mean by that is that, for instance, the early numbers, the early sketches, the early songs, or whatever you call them, the dance songs, dance routines and songs, for instance, the first one with Lady Gaga, the theme there was pink. They were fluffing around with pink kind of pom-poms. Well, pink, of course, is the colour of the gays. And this was then repeated with the Can-Can show, which took place a few moments later, also pink. And the reason I'm mentioning that in the context of anti-Christianism is that this was all right next to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which is one of the most famous buildings in the world and certainly in France. But it is a cathedral. It's not the Eiffel Tower. It's not a secular building. It is the Cathedral of Paris. And yet here you had this, as it were, mocking, it wasn't in the cathedral, but it was very close to it.
It was the same thing, straight outside. It was a mockery. It was a mockery of Christianity.
And then you had other very sinister things which have attracted slightly less attention. You had a really sinister moment where some children got into a boat. The boat was being piloted by a very sinister death-like figure with a mask and sort of rags, and he was wearing what appeared to be a sort of 18th century tailcoat, but underneath the tailcoat he had rags, a bit like a mummy, a bit like a corpse.
Yeah.
And the children were then taken in this boat, which was in fact in the sewers of Paris. But it immediately reminded some people, me certainly, of the Styx, of the river where dead souls are carried across into the kingdom of death.
Yeah.
You know, there was a whole series of these things, and of course the Last Supper scene was the culmination of it. But within that, there were sinister details which have been commented on, but which I'd like to comment on now in case our listeners
Please.
don't know about. There were children, of course, in that scene among the drag queens and so on. And there's one very, very dark moment where a guy in ridiculously short shorts makes this gesture. He draws his finger across his throat as he leans down towards one of the children. And maybe it was just some kind of dance gesture, but many people have said, was this some kind of horrific allusion to, I don't know, murder or child sacrifice or something? It
had to be. I don't know what other interpretation you could give it. So full of debauchery, full of mockery of Christian values, the desecration of any kind of Western culture. That was certainly what it was. It could have been a fantastic festival for something that represented LGBTQ week. That would have been a perfect fit for that.
Yeah, but I said that. I said it was like a combination of a gay pride march and a death cult.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yes, and of course on the point about Western culture, another point I've made is that the elite, the political and artistic elite. I'm thinking, of course, of the president of the French Republic himself, Emmanuel Macron, but also the entourage and the people who actually created the show. They seem to me to have a very provincial obsession with foreigners, whereas France, of course, prides herself on being, a beacon of civilization in the world, and indeed one of the main sources of the West. And yet, instead of having specifically French themes, they had a lot of trashy foreigners, starting with Lady Gaga. And then, going on with, they even had John Lennon's Imagine at one point. You'd think we'd moved on since 1971 with that song.
Yes.
But no, we have to have it again. So there was no sense of identity. The only identity was basically, globalist trash,
Yeah.
plus obviously the sort of Satanism that we've been referring to.
Yeah, very good point. Now, talking about Satanism and pedophilia, this plays a role in French culture at the moment, and a video of you is circulating on social media with your call, rightfully, to stop displaying sadistic pedophile pornography in public places such as art galleries. For those who missed it the last time I played it, here it is again. Have a look at this.
This is John Laughland. I'm the director of FVD International. I'm speaking to you from the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. Behind me you can see an exhibition space. I'm not allowed to film in there. I started to film and the guards told me I had to stop. The reason is that there's a painting in there which shows two children with their hands tied behind their backs being forced to perform oral sex on a grown man. It's an example of the banalization of paedophilia. The French judicial authorities have recently said that this painting should stay, even though an appeal was made against the museum by an organization defending the rights of children. In the name of free expression, therefore, something is now hanging in the public space in Paris, which is designed to banalize the worst forms of sadistic paedophile pornography. FVD demands that this stop, both in the Netherlands, both in France, and indeed all across the world.
Here's another classic example that you rightly pointed to. The artistic value of this has been crossed into pedo porn.
Yeah. Well, that exhibition took place over a year ago, and indeed this video has resurfaced recently on social media. But it's if you like, it's just one example among many. In the name of freedom of expression, a very disturbing image is introduced into the public space. I say public space because that museum, the Palais de Tokyo, belongs to the city of Paris. So it is a public space. It's not a private museum. It's introduced into the public space under completely false pretenses, by the way, because the artist, when criticized about this, said that it did something to do with the war in Ukraine, which was obviously just a blatant lie. And this person, who knows what her motives were? It was a woman. But the very fact of introducing such an image into the public space should, of course, in my opinion, as I said in that video, be rejected, because these are, we were talking about COVID shots and viruses a moment ago, but it's like a sort of poison that you introduce into the bloodstream of society.
Yeah.
And once it's in there, it's very difficult to get it out, particularly if the antibodies of society have been weakened, as they have been, by remorseless attacks which have been going on now like this for decades.
Now, that was my question. How long has this really been going on, this cultural attack on the West? Does it go back decades, does it?
It definitely goes back decades. So obviously to the 1960s. I mean, in some senses, it goes back further. But I get the impression that it's remorseless and accelerating. I say remorseless because we were just talking about the Paris Olympic ceremony. That was supposed to be amazingly challenging with the drag queens and so on. But we should remind ourselves that in 2014, so 10 years ago now, the ridiculous Eurovision Song Contest, which is also, of course, complete trash, was won by a transsexual Austrian. called Conchita Wurst, and this woman, who dresses up as a woman, was then welcomed in great ceremony at the European Parliament and hailed as a symbol of, modernism and progression and all the rest of it. That was 10 years ago, so we've already done that gig. But no, it has to come back again and again and again. And we had, of course, the bearded lady dancing at the Paris Olympics in a particularly grotesque number we haven't mentioned until now, but there was a bearded lady, a man. I think it's a man with boobs and a sort of blonde beard. I mean, it was just absolutely a real freak show. So what I'm saying is that this is remorseless. And, in case anybody forgets, in case anybody thinks, oh, well, that happened 10 years ago. No, they come back, and the coherence of the show, of the Paris show, is very important because it was thought through. All the symbols that I mentioned a moment ago, they didn't come out of nowhere. They were thought through. The whole thing was thought through.
Would have been checked and double-checked and approved and signed off on, you name it. One last thing. We're seeing a reflection of the oddity of, I guess, intersex and transgender identity politics being played by the IOC, when at the same Olympic Games, we have got men, biological men playing soccer, biological men boxing, or intersex men boxing, people with the wrong chromosomes to compete in elite women's sport, and we're ruining one part of the Olympic Games.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just ideology gone mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are supposed to believe that the boxer you referred to is a woman, and I don't know. It's anthropologically, it's very fascinating to see how the power of ideology. You can show people a picture of that man, and they will tell you, yes, it's a woman. Everyone can see he's a man,
Yeah.
And of course he's been tested. But and yet people will still maintain, contrary to the evidence of their eyes, a falsehood out of pure ideology. Groucho Marx had, who do you believe, me or your lying eyes? But that was a joke, and this is not a joke.
No,
This is severe levels of cognitive dissonance, where people, for ideological reasons, in order to conform to what they understand to be ideological pressure, will say things that are patently untrue.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And look at the mainstream media with the Special Olympic rights. They've played the compliant card right down the line and have hardly mentioned this controversy.
Yes, indeed, that's right. And it's a very sad and horrible business because, as we know, I think she was Italian, the defeated boxer. Yeah. She was, of course, in tears and so on, and she was very severely hurt, as far as I understand. So yeah, exactly. It hasn't been given any kinds of, and then again, you wonder, well, what planet are these people on? Because for decades we have, of course, had feminism, and men shouldn't beat up women. There's domestic violence. There's a whole international convention about domestic violence of men against women, and yet there, in the Olympic Games, very much in the public space, we have a man beating up a woman, and that's supposed to be okay.
Yeah. It's just terrible, terrible hypocrisy. Dr. John Laughland, fabulous to have you on the program, and thank you very much for giving us your time in the early morning.
Okay, nice to talk to you.
Much appreciated. John Laughland, the director of Forum for Democracy International and a lecturer in political science and history at the Catholic Institute. He's been on TNT before, but not for a while. Good to get him on, especially at this juncture when Paris is the focus of the world, and I'm sorry, it's falling down badly and embarrassing itself on the world stage.